groups of the Army Air Force, the Office of Scientific Research and Development, the U.S. Army. I did the CIA, the Office of Strategic Services, which was the predecessor, and I tried to find anything to do with the wartime phenomenon.
You know, I want to ask you a little bit about that because it's very interesting. When you go into the archives like that, how is it structured? Can anybody do it? Is it easy to find things? Can you search on a computer nowadays? How does it work?
Well, the National Archives, it's getting better every year, but it's open to the general public. You can go there, and there are archivists there who will help guide you. You can know absolutely nothing about archival research and walk in and then say, here's what I'm looking for. And it can be a host of subjects. I mean, as much as you can think of a subject, it'll be there regarding World War I, World War II, civilian and military records. And it holds, I believe, 500 record groups, Department of State, Office of Scientific Research and Development, CIA, OSS, on and on and on. And so then you determine, well, I need to see the information coming out of those offices, and then from there you get a feel of how the records are broken down. And for instance, for the military records, you would think, well, I need to see what they were reporting. So you would go to the mission reports. And you would just keep narrowing it down. Well, you need to go to the actual group or bomb level or fighter group level and then find out where those records are being kept. And there's finding aids to help you along the way. So it's a very easy but tedious process. The more you do it, of course, the better at it you are.
Sure.
However, it's absolutely huge in scope, meaning that the finding aids are very, very general, and a lot of times you really just have to dig in and go through the material, and that's how discoveries are made.
Interesting. And as you say, anyone can do it, but you need to like set up a time with them, call them beforehand. What's going on there?
No, you just need to show up, and you get yourself a identification badge, has your picture on it, and you're free to go there Monday through Friday.
Cool.
From 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock, and sometimes later, depending on the day. And as much as you want, and it's a very, 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 very interesting, and of course, quite a lot of people are involved.
Yeah.
And but it's definitely open to the public. I think that's what you're trying to find out.
Yeah, exactly. And a little bit about the procedure, because I constantly hear about people looking into the archives, but I never actually ask someone, how it actually works, so to speak. So it's great to kind of get a little bit of insight in how it works, so to speak.
Sure. And then once you're in there, you can also, the archives, you can place a FOIA, Freedom of Information Act request for information that you think is still classified.
So there is information that is kind of in the archives, but is not accessible to everyone at first?
Absolutely. There are still things that are classified for a host of reasons. For instance, I know for a fact there are 1,500,000 documents of air intelligence files from 1942 to 57, somewhere in that range. Probably half of that is World War II. And a lot of times the information that's classified is only because they haven't had the manpower to declassify it, or it still has terminology or information that for whatever reason, the intelligence agency who supplied it to the archives feel that it still is something worth keeping. Now, my question is why so much kept in World War II? Why so much secret? And I still think it is a degree of a manpower issue going in. A strange story, after 2001, the attack on the World Trade Center buildings, I had put a FOIA request in. It took me about a year to get, I'd say, 100 boxes released to me that had to do with air intelligence starting in 1942. Well, after the event, the Air Force came back in and reclassified my records.
Really?
Yes, and their reason was all they had to do was find one document that said, let's say, atomic bomb. Well, the whole slew of records would be then reclassified. It was really an overreaction.
Huh. Yeah.
And so, there's lots of stories like that. But the records are there. If you know what you're doing, and the more you do it, you can find out names of documents that you know exist.
Sure.
And then you can FOIA it. And if it is in there and still not declassified, because of the FOIA Act, they will assign someone to work on that and then get it declassified to you.
Interesting. Yeah, fascinating. I mean, you've been looking at the National Archives of the U.S. Have you also been looking at other archives? I know that constantly now, it seems like almost that there are new things being released. I know that France was releasing documents from the government relating to UFO sightings, as well did the UK. Have you been looking at these too?
Unfortunately, personally, I have not, and that has to do with just time and money. I'm an hour and a half away from the College Park archives, which are the National Archives military branch, so I could commit to doing a real focused search regarding the Public Records Office, which in England, I believe they're called National Archives now, which is confusing. I had to rely on other researchers' work.
Sure.
The same with the Italian files. I mean, a lot of research was done in Italy. Of course, the German. I mean, Russian files. Unfortunately, my search was limited to U.S. and Britain because, of course, a lot of the files were attached to the American files from Britain. So I would see RAF information. So I was fortunate enough to have a good grasp on that. But I had to rely on other people regarding international archives. So my book, while in depth, is really just a tip of the iceberg, and it just lays the foundation for other researchers around the world to start to assimilate and put together the phenomenon as a whole.
Right. Well, fascinating. I mean, let's dive into it, so to speak, and talk a little bit about the things that you found when you went into the archives and looked. I guess a good place to start is how far back in regards. I guess we still have to focus around the time and period of World War II, of course, but how far back around that time do we need to go to kind of begin to pick up on the first sightings of these, either if we're talking about UFOs or Foo Fighters?
Well, we have to go back to December of 1933, and it does go back farther, but John Keel had started an in-depth investigation into what they called the Scandinavian sightings,
right?
Which were sightings, of course, Norway, Sweden, and Finland. And this, of course, coincided with the storm that was brewing in Europe. Hitler had come to power. So there was unprecedented amount of sightings around the world, though, that looked at through today's eyes had similarities with the UFO sightings of current day. Now, they didn't call them UFOs. They didn't call them Foo Fighters. They were called phantom flyers, ghost aviators, and what was taking place over those three countries primarily were they were observing aircraft of some type that were performing beyond the capability of some of the best pilots in Europe. They were these objects were flying in severe weather. They were flying in territories that the fuel capacity of the known aircraft did not exist. They were also flying so often that there was a real challenge in thinking regarding that. Of course, Nazi Germany's Air Force was, at the time in 1933-34, were pretty much biplane, carryover from World War I. Russia was almost non-existent. Economic problems around the world. The United States was too far away to do an operation of this nature. Japan was fighting China. So looking at it through the eyes of, well, what could these be? Germany seemed to be the closest, but it wasn't matching. And John Keel dived into the investigation and found many reports that showed that the Swedes, the Norwegians, the Finnish authorities were actually authorizing investigations, because as like today, these objects were around military installations.
Yeah.
Sometimes, and some made noise, some didn't. Some aircraft were seen shining beams of light down to the ground. Some, there was noise associated that did sound like aircraft, yet they could never see or describe the aircraft. There were civilian sightings. Of course, my book stays specifically with the military of it.
Yeah.
And so John Keel led the pack with that. Now, I'm sure there's been quite a bit of newer information coming out of the countries, and there are investigators that are still diving into the Scandinavian sightings.
Sure.
But to this day, overall, the sightings, some of the sightings do dictate there was some type of very unconventional aircraft.
Right. Do you say that this goes then even in Scandinavia as far back, or beginning even in 1933? Because what I've read so far, at least, is that they kind of peaked, I guess, then in around 1946, where situations were a little bit different in regards to, the Germans potentially had, the V2 rockets developed, and the Russians potentially even might have, gotten a hold of test rockets themselves and firing V2 rockets at in and around 1946. But you're saying that all the way back to 1933, this was happening in Scandinavia, right?
Yes. Now, with the 1946 sightings, they're called, I believe they're called the ghost rockets.
That's right, yeah.
And there was I think thousands of the sightings, and they followed a certain path. I don't think they found, for everything that they had seen, there was very little physical evidence. And from what I understand, investigations were launched to determine if it was indeed the Soviet Union firing rockets as tests.
Yeah.
And of course, that's the most popular theory today.
Sure.
But the controversy still surrounds that whole period. But as far as 1933 and on, these sightings were even more spectacular because they were hovering. There were lights associated, like I said, shining down on the ground, just like out of Close Encounters, the movie.
Sure.
There were objects that were completely illuminated. And so there was a large gambit, and I picked 1933 because on the record, investigations were started by all three countries, Finland, Norway, Sweden, and they were unable to determine what it was.
They actually set up, you're right, because I read today that they set up a ghost rocket committee, basically, and there are actually archives today, military archives in Swedish, around 2,000 pages, and I know that there is a Swedish UFO organization that have been going through some of the material, and there's, in some cases there are actually even photographs of these things. Have you heard about this?
I have, and I forget the gentleman's name who runs the archives over there. Do you happen to remember?
I don't actually. I can dig that up later, but not right now, no.
I know I can't. It's on the tip of my tongue, but yes, and hopefully I've presented my material accurately, because yes, they are conducting extensive research into that period of time.
Yeah.
So, but unfortunately, again, communication around the world was limited for my book.
Sure. No, exactly. I mean, there's